So we're looking today at lesson 4 of Judges, and this is chapters 6 through 8. And this was a lot of reading, but it's just one big story, about Gideon. So we're not gonna go through all the details of it, but we will just hit the highlights of what we learned about Gideon. So to start with, you might want to have your at a glance chart in front of you, and maybe your map. And we're just going to do a quick review, and I want you to see how using this at a glance chart is very helpful, because it gives you a running story of what's happening in the book of Judges and helps you remember it. So I'm just going to walk through it, the first 5 chapters. Okay, so in the first chapter, we remember that they did not drive out the enemy as they were told to do, right?
Yeah.
Second chapter, we see the cycle of disobedience. That cycle is like they do evil in the sight of the Lord, and then God gives them over to their enemies, and then after they're oppressed for so many years, they cry out to God, and then God delivers them by raising up a judge. So that's the cycle that we keep seeing running over and over. And in chapter 3, we start seeing the judges that God raised up to deliver them. And in chapter 3, there were actually 3 judges. Who can tell me who the judges were?
Well, the main one was Ehud. Is it Shamgar?
Mm-hmm.
What's the other one?
Yes, Othniel,
Othniel. Yeah.
Ehud, and Shamgar.
Yeah.
And you probably remember Ehud the most, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of him and how he stuck that sword in and delivered them. Okay, and then in chapter 4, who's the judge that God raised up to deliver them?
Deborah.
Deborah, right. This was the first woman judge that was ruling Israel. So Deborah, and Deborah was teamed up in that battle with Barak. Chapter 5, we have the victory song that Deborah and Barak sang after they defeated the enemy. It's interesting because that was my least favorite chapter, chapter 5, but I have done a lot of thinking about it this last week. It is just kind of stuck in my head because of the victory, and then how it listed the tribes. Remember how it listed the tribes, those who came to help and those who didn't, and those who thought about it and then didn't. Excuse me. And just the idea of, we can find ourselves in that list somewhere. When there was a people that were being oppressed and needed to be delivered, and the call was put out, then who actually showed up to do it? The call went out to everybody. And there were those who did it to the death. They were in it 100% to the death. And then there was, I think it was Reuben that was like, well, I'm going to think about it. It's considered in my heart, but then did nothing. And then there were those who just did nothing and just stayed on the ships or stayed by the seashore. So that list, has just been stuck in my mind all week. About what do we do when the call goes out for us to stand on the side of the Lord? And where are we in that list? So that I got to get that out of my head for this week, but that's just been there. It's just been there. It's just a simple list of tribes, but there's always a reason why things are listed in Scripture, and what do we get out of it? So that was my takeaway from that. So this week we're on chapter 6. And what did you title chapter 6 on your at a glance chart? Anybody want to share that?
The afraid judge.
Yeah, just put Gideon's calling. Yeah.
Go in the strength you have.
Okay. So this chapter is about Gideon, right? A story we all know. So let's look at chapter 6. How does this chapter start out in these first couple of verses? How does verse 1 say? What does it say?
People of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord.
So they did evil in the sight of the Lord. So again, we're seeing that same cycle, right? The
Yeah.
same cycle, just over and over and over. So this time, who is the enemy that is oppressing Israel, and for how long?
Midian,
For 7 years.
Okay, for 7 years. Midian for 7 years. Okay, now let's take a look at how were they oppressed? What did that look like in the first 10 verses? What does it look like, this oppression?
they moved to the caves in the mountains.
Can you say that a little bit louder, Noella?
Yes, they moved to the caves in the mountains.
Okay,
And their crops were always destroyed.
They were brought low by the Midianites.
they were brought low, right? How low?
To the
You know,
point
you actually
they
find
were,
them.
they were hiding. They're just trying to hoard, not hoard, but they were hiding any little bit of food that could help them. And they were afraid of these people.
It was like they were in survival mode, you know, they're just trying to figure out how to live in hiding.
They cried out for help.
Well, they were also referred to as locusts, that they were compared to locusts, which would just be like just desolation.
Right, just, I mean, a good point. They were so numerous compared to the locusts, and then what the locusts do, they just destroy everything in their sight. So here's Midian, and when did they oppress them year round? When did they show up?
Harvest was ready.
When the McDonald's truck came around, when the food.
Right, right, right. So it was during harvest, wasn't it? Every harvest season, they would show up and they would take everything. What does it say? What did they took?
Everything.
Thing.
Stuff.
They
And
left
they
no
waste
substance.
land waste.
So animals, what about the animals?
Nothing for them.
The livestock and all of their produce, and they would just strip it all from them. So you can see why they were oppressed, they were hiding, they were fearful of these people. It was their livelihood. Like I think it was Heather said, they were trying to survive. They were in survival mode. So that was going on for 7 years. And when they cried out, in verse 7, you see them crying out again, then what does God do?
He sent a prophet.
Okay, he sent a prophet. Now, interesting, look at what does the prophet say to them?
He repeated their history with him.
Okay.
Does this prophet have a name?
I'm sorry, Noel, I didn't catch that.
Does this prophet have a name?
Okay, yeah.
So what is it?
I feel like they were telling them what they know, that you know this, why aren't you acting on this? On what you know. about me, about God, not about God.
Mhm. So he's reminding them of who he is and what he's done for them, correct? And historically. And then what does he say in verse 10?
And also he's reminding them that they're there because of their own choices. He's reminding them, I told you what to do, you didn't listen, and now this is what I told you would happen if you didn't listen. And Noella, there is no name for that prophet.
Thank you.
Okay, I think somebody in that room just answered the question Noella had. Is that what happened?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this it's kind of hard to hear some of these microphones. But right, so he says to them, I am your God. You should not fear the enemy. You should not fear the enemy. Okay, but there's in verse 10. Here's this contrast. What does it say?
You have not obeyed my voice.
You have not obeyed my voice. You have not obeyed my voice. Do you have a clue like why God would say that?
Is it kind of like I told you so?
What have they done that he would say, you have not obeyed my voice?
Been disobedient to him.
Mhm.
They
In
didn't
what
drive,
way?
they didn't drive the enemy out.
You
Yeah.
did what was evil
Mhm.
in the sight of the Lord.
We're going to see more about what he means when he says, you have not obeyed my voice, when we get into what he is telling Gideon to do. But before we get to that, let's talk about how did he call Gideon? Because now he's going to raise up Gideon to deliver them, right? So let's look at verses 11. Let me find my place. Oh, wait, before we do that, I've already lost my place. So when he talks about you have not obeyed me, we want to look at the cross references that you looked up on page 38 in your homework about idolatry. Page 38. So tell me, what do you learn that scripture says about idolatry and how we can put this together with what they have done?
They made idols out of wood.
Okay. What else do you see in these scriptures about idolatry?
There were in Leviticus,
Mhm.
there were the command to not make any idols for themselves, and then there were promises given if they would be obedient to that, and then there were consequences given if they disobeyed God and worshipped idols. If they broke their covenant, then
Mhm.
there was consequences listed of what would happen. And it was some of the things that have happened here.
Okay.
Other enemies would defeat them, deserted roads, some of that we saw in previous lessons, scattered among nations, that they would sow the seed uselessly. God would summon a terror against them with other nations.
I thought the Exodus one also was giving clear direction about what they should do, breaking down the altars, breaking down the Asherah poles, making sure that there's nothing or anyone or anything that would come before God.
I liked how the progression of what they were making it out of. Like the first command in Exodus was don't make it out of wood, then it was in Exodus 34, don't make it out of metal, and then in Leviticus it says don't make it out of stone. It's like, don't make it. Like they keep trying to tick off the things to make it out of. Okay, you said no wood, I'll make it out of metal. Or oh, okay, out of stone. So just don't do it.
Yeah.
But I how much they had to repeat that fact of, like, don't have any other God, don't worship what is created, what is made on this earth. Like, look to who created it.
In Exodus, the 34th chapter, it also speaks about the third and fourth generation because of the iniquity of the fathers, which refers back to not driving the people out of the land to begin with.
Did anybody think Isaiah 44 was interesting? That's on page 39 in your homework. This is one of my favorite passages about idols. Isaiah 44, 6 through 20. What are your thoughts on this?
And he contrasts the idol worship with who he really is. You know, he just doesn't leave him floundering. You know, this is who I am. And it's just such an affirmation of who he is, and not just, oh, this is all wrong. Just
Yeah, Linda, and also, yeah, I particularly like verses 14 through 20. Just the way it showed kind of the ridiculousness of making a graven image. Here you have a tree and you're cutting it down. You're using part of it to burn and cook food and warm yourself. And then you're going to take the other part and you're going to bow down to it. I mean, don't you realize this is a block of wood you're bowing down to? I just really like the way that that was illustrated for us, you know, so clearly that, you know, you should not have any other gods. There's only one God.
It's
Right.
referred to as folly.
Say that again.
It's referred to as folly.
It's referred to as folly?
As folly.
Folly?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Ridiculous.
Yes. Ridiculous. Right. And I love, like Betty said, you know, it's like it puts it out there like, this is so ridiculous. Don't you even see that? And compared to, like Nancy was saying, who God really is, it's just such, you know, contrast. And he even says it's just man who made this block of wood. There's nothing special about it. Any other thoughts on that, on idol worshiping that we saw in scripture? What about on page 40, Colossians 3, verse 5? What does that have to say about what is idolatry?
It gives,
Must be put to death.
yeah, and it gives, it compares, it is saying that idolatry essentially is sexual immorality. That is idolatry, impurity, passion, evil desire, greed. It lists those things as being idolatry, and that we should put that to death. And I thought the word study, it didn't say to do the word study, but I can't help myself on put to death, that Greek word, which is very strong and means not simply to suppress that, but to wipe it out completely. Well, I thought that was perfect for did not drive out. It is, it's why the people were in a cycle of sin.
Thank you, Carla, for the word study. And I'm going to bring that back in when we look at what Gideon is called to do in just a minute. But let's look now at the call of Gideon back in chapter 6, verse 11.
Wow.
So verse 11 through 24 is where God is calling Gideon. So let's just kind of take a look at that. What did that look like?
I guess I love that God can find people anywhere. And that he speaks about us better than we sometimes speak about ourselves, because when that angel came and called him a mighty man of valor, I just thought that he would never describe himself as that.
Because where was he at this point? Where was he?
He was beating out, I think he was hiding, trying to beat out some food that they could hide, if I'm right.
Exactly.
And verse 13, I think, is a bit rich. When he complains that if the Lord is with them, what's this all about? When it says clearly at the beginning that the people of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And yet he doesn't seem to know why they've got into trouble.
Yeah, it's the classic why statement, isn't it?
Mhm.
Why?
He said he was of the least of the tribes and he was the lowest of the least.
Mm.
So he's hiding, beating out some food, and God sends an angel and says to him, mighty man of valor. So like Sue was saying, it's not how Gideon would describe himself, but there's that potential that God sees in him to do the job that God is going to call him to do. And besides asking why, how does Gideon respond to that?
Well, he wants a sign, I suppose.
He wants a sign.
Mhm.
So does God give him a sign? And what is
Yep.
it?
The fleece.
What's the sign?
The fleece is going to be wet and the ground dry, or the other way around, both.
Okay, you jumped ahead to the fleece.
Oh, have I? I've jumped to the fleece. Oh,
That's
sorry.
okay. That's okay, because that's going to happen as well. But here in these few verses, when Gideon says, don't leave until I bring you
Food.
some food, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when he brings it, he prepares it all. And then what happens?
Fire comes out of the rock and consumes it.
Okay. Gideon was probably thinking, I was going to have leftovers. Consumes it. But then, okay, what does that do for Gideon?
Nothing. It's not enough.
Well, what did he think then? What did he realize?
He was
Realizes that it truly is God's presence.
Okay. He realized truly this was God's presence.
Right.
And now what's he feeling?
afraid he was going to die because he had seen
Right.
God's face.
Right.
Right. He's afraid he's going to die because he has seen God face to face.
Right.
And one other thing is that, like, this is the first time we see this group of people building an altar. He builds an altar, to the Lord. So I think verse 24, that's the first time I see any recognition of God over
Oh, sure.
other gods.
Sure. And so why did he build the altar there, Sue?
Why did he build the altar there? Because he was honoring the Lord, and the Lord will bring peace to him. And the Lord's gonna be.
Yeah. So and he names it I've lost it. Called
The
it,
Lord is
the Lord is peace. Okay. So and the context there, remember the context. He's afraid he's going to die because he has seen God face to face.
Mhm.
And God says, do not fear. Do not fear. you shall not die. And so he now has peace about that and builds the altar, says the Lord is peace. So now let's look at what does God tell him to do? Tell him to do in verse 25 to 32.
To tear down the altars to Baal, the Asherah pole and the altar of Baal that his father had built.
Oh, that his father had built.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, very significant fact here, right? Are you okay, Sue?
It's just, oh my goodness.
Why does he wonder why they're in trouble?
Right. Yeah.
Verse 13. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why whinge about that when it's so obvious?
But to appease that, he has to take his father's bull to make the sacrifice.
Right. So God is telling him, tear down these idols, and like Noella said, take your father's bull. How many bulls is he supposed to take?
One,
Two.
two. That's right.
Two.
Two. Okay.
A 7-year-old.
So his father built the idols, and now he's being told to take his father's bulls and tear those down. And not only tear them down, but what?
Burn them. Burn them for the bull.
Okay.
Burn them for the.
Build an altar to God.
Yes, build an altar to God. So this goes back to what Carla was saying with the word study. Totally destroy, right? To the point of you tear down an altar, an idol, but then you don't just leave that spot empty. You build an altar to God.
Oh, that's cool. Oh gosh.
Yeah, I'm letting you think about that a second.
Break generational sin.
I found it very significant that God tells him how to build the altar. And I found that to be significant. I didn't even pick up on that until the end of Judges 8 with the whole ephod thing. So we'll probably get to that later, but that's the point at which I went, oh, okay. God told him exactly how to build an altar.
So the instructions, go tear down your father's altars, use your father's bulls to do it, and then sacrifice your father's bull, the second bull that is 7 years old, on that altar that you built for God. Okay, replace one with the other. Okay?
Leave it empty. Fill it with God.
So, does Gideon do it?
Yes, but at night.
At night.
Okay.
Because he was afraid of it.
But at night, okay, put yourself in Gideon's shoes.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Okay. So he goes at night. He has 10 men, 10 of his servants, and they all go at night. And it says because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day. So he did it by night. Totally understandable, right? This is his father. His father built these. So he goes out at night and does it. He's obedient and he does it. Okay. And in the morning, what happens? no.
They're all furious.
When they see it, what
Has torn down the idols.
say that again, Noella?
I said, the men of the town come seeking him because they have found out that who was responsible.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And so
But
what do they want? What do they
They
want?
want to kill him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And who do they go to?
His father.
Yeah.
His father. Bring him out so we can kill him. Now, here's one of my favorite things too. What's his father's response?
Yeah.
He defends him.
Are you going to stick up for Baal above God?
Let Baal.
Which is,
Go ahead, Pat.
carry on.
Say that again, Dan.
I said, let Baal take care of him, not us.
Mm-hmm. Right. It kind of goes back to that Isaiah 44. You know, it's just a block of wood. So if he is a God, then let him defend himself. It's just a block of wood.
But his father had built it, which is, it's good that his father suddenly realized, I suppose, when they wanted to finish Gideon off, that it was just a block of wood.
I sense also too that all of them knew that they all had shame that they had done this as Israelites. That there was some shame that they had. It was almost like they had built these idols just to get along. I don't know if that would be true because I think there was more fear about what's going to happen to them instead of we lost our idol.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But now, okay, so now it's time for Gideon to go and deliver Israel from the Midianites. Right?
Yes.
So in verse 32, and 33, he calls all of these tribes to come and help him. So they've gathered, the enemies have gathered at the Valley of Jezreel, which is where the fight was where Barak defeated Sisera. It's up in the north of the country. Right? And so that's where the enemy has gathered. And now Gideon has to gather his people in verse 35, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they went up to meet him there. So now the battle is set. And now, Patricia, what happens with the sign? Because now Gideon is like, oh, I'm still not sure.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, I'm not sure. So what does he want?
Yeah, you want to say wimp? No, he needs another sign, and then another
sign, and then another sign.
Yeah.
So that's the famous fleece that we know about Gideon. Make the fleece wet and the ground dry, and then reverse it, make the ground dry and make the fleece wet. Just to be sure. What does this tell you about God?
He's patient.
Then he understands.
Yeah, he understands my fear.
Huh? He certainly understood Gideon, and he was patient. And even though if you go back,
and like, because it feels like he just understands our humanity and our self-consciousness and our lack of confidence in ourselves, and that because of that, he just kept compassionately coming alongside of Gideon. And to be really honest, like I've always heard this story in a really sarcastic voice, I think. Like, oh, you man of valor, like in a place of sarcasm, like giving him a hard time for being afraid. And this week has really been pretty eye-opening for me in the sense that, like, this is Gideon in his lowest, most scared place, and I understand him asking why, and I understand his fear and trying to just live in a place of survival, and the absolute compassion of God to continually come alongside and be like, no, I'm with you, I'm your peace, I'm gonna get you through this. And I think that is a huge thing for him to say, like, I'm going to do these tests for you because I know where you're living.
Amen.
I love that. Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, all through this, we have to remember to look at, what do we see about God and how is he working with Gideon? Even though he told him in the very beginning, I will be with you. I will be with you. Go in this, your strength, that I am with you. But he has to bring Gideon along to that point of valor that he sees in him. So he's patient and he answers him. And he's even going to do it one more time, isn't he? If we look at chapter 7, if we just move into chapter 7, because now they're at the camp.
Oh, yeah.
Whoops. What did I missed the part about him going down to the camp. Where is that? And hearing the dream.
Verse 9.
Oh, we're not there yet. Okay, thank you. So chapter 7 now, he's preparing them for war and they're all gathered, but then what does God say? What happens here in these verses when in verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand.
He didn't want them to boast over themselves that they were so great in battle. So he reduced their number 2 different times.
Okay. So what does he reduce the number to?
10,000 the first time.
Mm-hmm. And then it's still too many.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is the final number?
300.
300, yeah.
300. So we know this about to take them to the springs and let them drink, and I'll just separate, those who are afraid, just send them home. Fear will beget fear, for one thing. So if you got a bunch of fearful people, that fear is going to spread. So send them home. And then you get down to the 300. Okay, let's go to war with 300 people against Midian. I mean, do you ever feel like that? Like you are in a battle that you're so far outnumbered,
Mm-hmm.
But God is saying, no, go forward. Go forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, outnumbered and unarmed, because
Mm-hmm.
the Midianites had oppressed them to the point where they didn't have anything. They didn't have livestock, they didn't have crops. I don't think they even had weapons. At least that was in a previous chapter, they didn't have weapons, but this tends to be the pattern with the cycle of sin and the oppression. And so I think they were outgunned completely as well as outnumbered. And therefore, I couldn't have blamed Midian or Gideon for being afraid.
It doesn't make sense. From our point of thinking, it does not make sense to go to war with 300 people against this enemy that has so oppressed us, that are like locusts. It doesn't make any sense. But like Carla said, God's point was, I don't want them to think that they did this. They have to know that I'm the one doing it because I'm your God. I'm your God. I've delivered you from this and from this and from this, and now you have to trust me. So he's trying to show them, again, so they have the 300 men. And here's, what's the battle plan? If you were a general and you were having a battle plan, is this the plan you would have? What's the plan?
The plan is to go down to the camp and spy on them.
Okay, because
far.
again, Gideon is like, oh, now that I got 300 men, I'm not real sure. So God's patience, and he says, go down. I wouldn't want to go into that camp, even to spy. But he does, and what does he hear?
A dream that a Midianite had. He was telling the other comrade the dream that a rock came into the camp and struck the tent, and it turned upside down and lay flat. Or I'm sorry, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp and then it lay flat.
Right.
And then the comrade interpreted the dream.
And says, oh, that's Gideon. Yeah. So now Gideon is fully ready to go.
Right.
So he goes back and he tells the guys, okay, this is what we're going to do.
And he worshiped.
Okay. Yeah. So what did they go to battle with?
Trumpets, jars.
Yeah.
Torches.
Trumpets and jars and torches. Okay. Okay. You want to sign up for a battle like that?
If God said to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot of trust. Okay. So then their strategy was divide the 300. Now you're just 100 in a group, right? Divide the 300 around the camp of Midian. And Gideon says, follow me, do what I do. So when they blow the trumpet, and it could have been a ram's horn. Okay. I tried to blow this earlier, but it didn't do anything. But but I got this in Israel and was actually at the Springs of Gideon teaching this and visualizing the locusts around, the Midianites around the area by the spring of water where they all lapped, to drink. And so I thought I would just use my visual aid today so they're going to blow these 300 horns, trumpets. And when they do, and they break the jars and the light. So now what happens when they do that? What happens?
There's
They ran away.
Yeah.
Second.
So they frightened the Midianites to the point where they were killing each other off.
Right. So if you look at verse 22, they blew the trumpets, and then who took control of the battle?
God did.
Yeah. God did. It says, and then the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. Gideon didn't even have to fight, did he? No, he just blew the trumpet, broke the jar, let the light out. They were surrounded, confused. God put them in confusion. They defeated themselves. Was it, so what do you think about that plan? Wonderful, you said? Yeah.
I think you saw God at work when they went down and heard that God had already been working in the minds of the enemy. And I wonder too if, you know, I mean, God's continued work even with Gideon being willing to smash those idols and send a message that we're not doing, you know, we're not doing this.
So not a plan that we would have devised. I would never have thought this wouldn't even be on plan B. But when God is developing the plan, and again, you know, his point was, I want them to see that I'm the one delivering them, not them.
Do you think having to control always the plan is part of our idol worship too?
Oh, anybody want to answer that?
Yeah.
Always having to control the plan, is that part of our idol worship?
Probably.
Yeah. He gave us the power of reasoning, but it's not to be above him. It's not to play God.
Right.
He always has a way of humbling us to only he can, beyond our reasoning.
Whatever controls our heart and mind becomes our idol.
My memory verse for this week was from Isaiah, and it was talking, or it said, "Your thoughts are not my thoughts, your ways are not my ways, says the Lord." And that it goes on to say how his ways are of heaven and it's much above our own understanding. And I just feel like this comes right back into play here in the fact that, yeah, we definitely try to take that role. We try to take that responsibility on our own. But it's true.
So good question, Sue, and good responses from everybody. So yeah, I think somebody said anything that controls our hearts and our minds becomes, you know, an idol if it's before, we put that before God. And, you know, the lesson, you know, is like, it's not going to be, and I'm such a rational, logical person that I would never have this plan, you know, but God always does things in a way that he's got to show you, no, of course you wouldn't have that plan because that's not my plan. I'm going to do this, you know, so he just, you know, your thoughts are not my thoughts, your ways are not my ways. Just be obedient. Just be obedient. Good lessons from Gideon. We are running out of time, so I'm just going to jump ahead to chapter 8. And I want to jump ahead to after the battle when they asked Gideon to rule them. We're going to skip over Ephraim being upset that they weren't called to the war first.
It's 22.
What was that, Patricia?
22, is it verse 22?
22, yes. In verse 22, the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to set up this dynasty, right? So tell me, how does Gideon respond to that?
The Lord will rule over you, not me or my sons.
So what does that say to you about Gideon?
He
recognized.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gayan.
No, it's okay, Carla.
I was just saying, I think he recognized that it wasn't his job to rule, that it was God's job to rule them. That God alone is sovereign, and that's kind of my insinuation into that, but a conclusion of that.
Because it could have gone to his head. He just won this battle with so few people and finished the job, chased them and done all that. So that was a good answer, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely could have gone to his head. He could have been on a power trip now. but he wasn't. But what did ask them? One request.
This is what I really don't understand.
Okay, and we are, yeah, the clock is ticking, but let's try to do this. Okay, so what did he ask?
Bring all the gold.
Okay, every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil.
Mhm.
And they willingly gave them and spread out the cloak, and they all threw the earrings in, and it was a lot of gold. And what did Gideon do with it?
Made an ephod.
Made an ephod. Okay, now what is an ephod? You look that up, page
Priestly
43.
It's one
What
of the
was
priestly garment.
Okay, they would wear it
The
for what
breastplate.
purpose? Mhm.
For worship
Okay, and it recognized, it had all the 12 tribes on it,
of
right?
Israel. Mhm.
Right, all the 12 tribes.
Mhm.
And they would use it in worship to seek God's answer, right?
Mhm.
So he made
Yes.
one, and he set it up in his city. And after he died, what happened? Well, even before he died, what does it say in verse 27?
Snare.
Became a snare. It became a snare to him, his family. Okay. Do you think, and I think this question was asked in your homework, do you think that it was Gideon's intention to set up something that would become an idol?
Surely
He
not.
made the ephod.
I think what I settled on, because I wrestled with this the longest.
Okay.
I didn't want to draw the wrong conclusion or be too hard on Gideon. So my personal opinion was, this is just my opinion, that he didn't set out with a wrong intention. Maybe he wanted to set up a place of worship for the people because the tabernacle and the ark were in Shiloh at the time. So I'm not sure. And that was in Ephraim country. And maybe that was a point he was making. I don't know. I don't think it was his intention, but this is where I came back to the beginning where God told him how to set up an altar with the stones and how to lay them in order. And he gave them all that instruction. So if he was going to make something of worship, he already has the thing. He's done it. He's already done it. He's had the instructions. So I think he should have known what it would lead to. I don't know that he intended or set out for that, but I personally believe he should have known better.
And if he had, or should have learned his lesson by that, he should have gotten rid of it.
I understand thinking that battle was so amazing. We need something to remember that by.
But weren't there some specifics about ephods as far as what was supposed to be used? I mean, it was designed by God as a remembrance, and they wore it around.
Yeah.
And it's just with different, onyx and all that. So it was kind of outside. It was a little bit of obedience, but he was kind of doing his own thing with
Right.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of it, and it's like we don't know why he did it, but like Carla said, he did. God told him to build an altar, take down the idol and build an altar. Okay, replace it with this altar. The ephod was maybe a step beyond, but maybe because he wanted something more visual, something more from the old, from the tribes. Who knows? But what I was thinking in the end of that is, we never intend to set out to build an idol. We never intend to set out to build an idol. But things can become an idol, which this ephod did. Can become an idol.
So I'll cherish the old rugged cross.
Anybody else want to burst into song?
No, I'm not going to, but the one that was running through my head was, I shall not leave the dear old flag.
Idol, right, right. So, so good lessons from Gideon about idols and about, listening to God and just seeing how God works in our lives and being able to trust him and knowing that we never intend to build an idol.
Mhm.
But sometimes, something becomes an idol. And then I think when Gideon said, and when he saw that, he should have destroyed it.
Mhm.
So it's when you see it, then you should destroy it.
I think sometimes the idol, doing this, and we don't mean to, we mean for it to direct us to God, but then that becomes what we worship instead and forget God.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Right,
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 exactly.
right. So we are a little over time, and I think some people have had to leave, but that's just great. I mean, that's fine, not great, but fine. But trying to sort these things out, wrestling with each other with scripture is always a good thing. And then the takeaway, is about what are we doing? What's an idol in our life? And if we see it, what are we going to do? Are we going to totally tear it down and replace it, with the proper thing? Or are we just going to partially tear it down, not totally destroy it? These are all questions that we have to answer for ourselves as well as these people that we're reading about. So God, once again, has established himself as the God by using a plan that nobody would have dreamed of to defeat the Midianites. So now Gideon is ruling, and he rules for 40 years. And then we know the cycle is going to continue. So this week, let's be aware of idols. Be aware of idols in our lives that we might not even be thinking about. But if we find an idol, then tear it down, replace it. Replace it. Even if it's your father's idol. Ugh, tough one. Okay. All right. So we'll see you all next week for lesson 5.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Linda.